Hello. This battle between Elveon commanding Galatia and myself commanding Carthage is another battle that is a case of countering a counter army. In a way, not as extreme as the previous battle, but still. My opponent picked Galatia, and judging by his build, he probably expected elephants, because these Galatian raiders, while they are pretty decent units for skirmishing and also melee, their primary objective is to take care of elephants with their javelins, and the same can be said of these Celtic skirmishers. So, I'm just going to fast forward here at the beginning. My opponent sends forward his Galatian raiders. Just stop it for a minute to take a look at the builds. 4 Galatian raiders, a Galatian nobleman general, 5 of these Galatian legionaries, 2 Galatian spears, 4 light horse, and 4 Celtic skirmishers. So a build that is more than capable of taking care of elephants. But I went for an infantry heavy build with 6 Libyan infantry, 3 Mercenary Iberian Swords, and 3 Mercenary Scutari. I have 2 Carthaginian cavalry, 3 Mercenary Balearic slingers, and a noble cavalry general. So fairly skirmish heavy, with 6 units that are capable of skirmishing, only 3 cavalry, but a strong core of good sword units. Now here, since my opponent has fairly weak cavalry, he doesn't have any heavy cavalry that I'm too worried about, I am going to use these late Libyan hoplites as bait. They'll be able to tank a lot of damage with their 45 shield value. That means that they will reflect a lot of the missiles coming in, somewhere around 50% of the missiles coming in from the front. And they'll be able to tire these guys out a bit as well. So I'm just moving them up in a fairly thin formation, and they are dropping, but not dropping really quickly. It's going to make these guys less cost effective than if they were firing at, say, Libyan infantry or Iberian swords or Carthaginian cavalry. Now the last thing you want to do is to chase javelin cavalry around with melee cavalry, because they rarely will be able to catch them, and while they are running, they are going to move into range of the javelins and get decimated. So there's rarely a case where it's a good idea to just follow javelin cavalry with your medium cavalry, and these guys are light missile cavalry, so they are faster than my medium melee cavalry and decidedly faster than my very heavy shock cavalry. But they are vulnerable to missiles. They only have 15 armor, and although they are pretty good at melee with 39 charge bonus, 40 weapon damage, 42 melee attack, and 56 melee defense, they are very good at melee actually. They have low armor, so missiles are going to tear them up fairly quickly. Here I'm just trying to sort of present tantalizing targets, bait a bit, send my cavalry forward with no intention of engaging, and then sending my skirmishers out to try to get some shots on him, but he is wisely moving his guys away from my mercenary Balearic slinger, so I'm probably not going to be able to do a lot of damage to him this way. I'm going to present these mercenary Balearic slingers, run them back, move my mercenary Iberian swords forward. He's throwing some javelins here, managing to kill some of my guys. But what I really want to do is entice him into coming into the range of my mercenary Iberian swords. And I quite like these skirmishing fights at the beginning of the game, where it's all about trying to use your skirmishers as effectively as possible to get an advantage. In this case, winning this engagement is going to allow me to have an advantage both in cavalry and in skirmishing, so it's very important that I manage to deal with these Galatian raiders. Now here you can see they are doing some friendly fire. The late Libyan hoplites are tanking a lot of missile fire, and that's going to make these guys less effective. So I'm preparing here for a small ambush of sorts, or a trap. I'm going to place my Iberian swords here, and then I'm going to move far forward with my mercenary Balearic slingers to make my opponent think that he can catch them. Then I'm going to pull them back through these mercenary Iberian swords, and hopefully they'll be able to throw their javelins as these Galatian swords move into range. And 120 soliferums are going to do a lot of damage to these Galatians. So here we go, moving the Balearic slingers back, then moving them forward again, which is going to make him move his Galatian raiders forward slightly. Then I'm going to push my guys forward and pull them back again. Just going to fast forward until something interesting happens. So here we go. Moving the Balearic Slingers forward. It's going to move his Galatian Raiders away from the range of my slingers, which is a smart thing to do. I'm going to pull them back, and now he thinks, okay, it's safe to rush back in here and try to get some kills, but these Mercenary Iberian Swords are waiting for just such an opportunity. And just look at this. Soliferum's incoming, decimating this unit of Galatian Raiders, absolutely destroying it. So that one mistake from my opponent cost him dearly. Cost him almost a whole unit of Galatian Raiders, and he took some casualties on the other units as well. So they are quickly becoming less and less effective by using their javelins and by just taking, look at this, just taking a whole lot of casualties from my Mercenary Iberian Swords, because it is easy to forget that Mercenary Iberian Swords have devastating skirmishing capabilities. So look at these kills here, pretty nice already. That's from a single volley. And now my opponent's going to move around my flanks, trying to look for openings. Moving away from my swords, I'm just going to push him out here, so to open up my flanks even more, hopefully trying to bait him into moving around here, because my Balearic Slingers are waiting, and so are my 2 cavalry units here. The thing is, because my opponent is a bit too slow here, I'm going to be able to do more casualties with these Mercenary Iberian Swords, just by running after and throwing these Soliferums. And now they're getting a whole lot of kills. These are all cavalry kills. I'm going to have to be a bit careful, because these light horse can destroy my Mercenary Iberian Swords on the charge. So I'm just going to move them back towards my own lines a bit, and he could have charged me here, but then he would run the risk of being counter-charged. So these shock cavalry are going to charge into the Galatian Raiders, get a shitload of kills on the charge, because these guys had taken damage from skirmishing from before, and just instantly routing those 2 units, and the last 2 units were routed by this Carthaginian cavalry, so already 70 kills on the noble cavalry. The noble cavalry isn't very good shock cavalry, it's decent shock cavalry, very vulnerable in melee, but if they can charge into damaged units, they can make them sustain a lot of casualties. And here the same thing is happening. Light horse getting too close to the Mercenary Iberian Swords, and they are getting decimated by missiles. So my opponent realizes that he has to make something happen here. He's going to push his entire line forward. I'm fairly confident that I can take him in a straight up melee fight. So I'm just going to send in my Libyan infantry, and after 30 seconds I'm going to activate shield wall, so they'll be able to hold for a bit longer. And now my opponent is going to target my Mercenary Balearic Slingers that are targeting his general, his Galatian noblemen, and they're going to be able to take care of them fairly quickly. But I'm not too worried. I would much rather have him kill my Balearic Slingers than having him kill my Libyan infantry, because they need to hold until I'm able to push back here into his flank. So I'm sending my swords around the flank and trying to get some more shots off on these light horse units. They'll be able to get another volley off, but most of the shots will miss. And my Libyan infantry and shield wall are more than a match for these Galatian legionaries. You can see they are fairly comparable in terms of stats, but the Libyan infantry when in shield wall are just slightly better. So my Balearic Slingers are getting decimated. Over here I'm able to send my Carthaginian cavalry into his light horse and intercept it with these Scutari and late Libyan hoplites, so they're going to die fairly quickly, and that's going to open up the rear of my opponent for charges. Over here the Mercenary Iberian Swords are supporting with javelins here, because this Libyan infantry isn't doing too well. So I'm flanking and sending them in against Galatian Spears, and they'll be able to do fairly well against Galatian Spears while flanking against these Galatian Legionaries. My opponent sends in his light horse to charge these guys. I just managed to turn them around in time, but they aren't braced, so they'll take a lot of casualties even from light horse. My Balearics are gone. Most of his cavalry on this flank is gone, only this one unit left. They're going to be charged by hoplites and Carthaginian cavalry now, going down very quickly indeed. That's going to open up the rear of my opponent, and I'll be able to take care of these Celtic skirmishers. So overall this is looking very good for Carthage. when these skirmishers are dealt with, there is nothing stopping me from rear charging all of his engaged units that are already quite decimated. And as you can see, my Libyan infantry are doing very well against these Galatian legionaries. I don't think he put them in shield wall, but it was a bit too late. And with shield wall, their defensive capabilities are just about the same as my Libyan infantry. Well, they have better melee defense, but their armor is the same. But they are more expensive units. So the skirmishers are dealt with, and now it's just a matter of wrapping this up by rear charging my enemy. So I think this was a case where my opponent expected elephants, he planned for elephants, and he had too few melee units. He wasn't ready to deal with sword spam. A borderline sword spam, I should say, because I did have 9 sword units. If you count the Mercenary Iberian Swords, I had 12 sword units, but they are kind of dual purpose units in that they can skirmish as well, so I'm tempted to not count them as just dedicated sword units. But definitely a very sword heavy build from Carthage, and a build that works well against most barbarian factions, especially if they plan for mainly elephants. So the rear charges are happening all across the line, and every unit is broken, and that's the end of the game. So these Galatian raiders were neutralized by very cheap units here. These Libyan hoplites took a lot of javelin fire, and these Mercenary Iberian Swords and my cavalry was able to deal with the rest of his cavalry. So got some nice kills on these guys without really losing anything. These guys did fairly well against the Galatian legionaries, about the same, or they actually did slightly better, but I had more units. And Mercenary Scutari barely took any damage because I kept them in reserve and went for flanking and rear charges. Mercenary Balearic Slingers did do too well. They mainly attacked his Galatian nobles and his horse units, and I kind of sacrificed them to keep fire off my melee infantry. So I could have pulled them back out of the range of these Celtic skirmishers, but I didn't want my front line to buckle under the javelins of these Celtic skirmishers. So GG and well played to my opponent. I'll see you again on the battlefield.